Charles André Joseph Marie de Gaulle was born on November 22, 1890, in Lille, a prominent city in northern France. His origins lie in a family deeply rooted in French history and culture. The de Gaulle family belonged to the French provincial nobility, with a long tradition of military and civil service. This aristocratic lineage profoundly influenced Charles's sense of duty and patriotism from an early age. The environment in which he was raised fostered a strong attachment to French national identity and an understanding of public responsibility. De Gaulle's father, Henri de Gaulle, was a classical literature teacher and a historian, and his mother, Jeanne Maillot, came from a devout Catholic family. The combination of a scholarly father and a religious, disciplined household created a nurturing intellectual atmosphere. From his father, Charles inherited an affinity for history and literature, which would later manifest in his writings and speeches. His mother's influence contributed to his moral rigidity and deep Catholic faith, both of which played significant roles throughout his life. The young Charles showed academic promise from an early age. He attended several prestigious schools, including the Lycée Louis-le-Grand in Paris, one of the most renowned secondary schools in France. At Louis-le-Grand, de Gaulle excelled in classical studies, particularly Latin and history, reflecting his father's academic interests. Despite this academic aptitude, he was known to be somewhat reserved and introverted, traits that would mark his personality in adulthood. In addition to his scholastic achievements, Charles de Gaulle developed a keen interest in military history and strategy during his adolescence. He was particularly fascinated by the Napoleonic Wars and the exploits of Napoleon Bonaparte, an admiration that would later shape his own military philosophy. This fascination was not merely theoretical. He eagerly read military treatises and biographies, which broadened his understanding of leadership and warfare. In 1909, de Gaulle entered the prestigious Saint-Cyr Military Academy, the premier institution for training French army officers. His acceptance into Saint-Cyr was a critical milestone in his life, marking the beginning of a lifelong career in the military. At Saint-Cyr, de Gaulle was known for his intellectual rigor and independent thinking. Although his performance was solid rather than outstanding, he demonstrated a clear capacity for strategic thought and leadership potential. During his time at Saint-Cyr, de Gaulle was shaped by the prevailing military doctrines of the French army, which emphasized infantry tactics and defensive warfare. However, he also began to question some of these traditional approaches, sensing that future conflicts would require new strategies and innovations. This critical stance towards conventional military wisdom would become a hallmark of his later career. After graduating from Saint-Cyr in 1912, de Gaulle was commissioned as a second lieutenant in an infantry regiment. This period provided him with practical experience in the army, complementing the theoretical knowledge he had accumulated. Although the years before the outbreak of World War I were relatively peaceful for France, de Gaulle's training and early postings prepared him for the challenges that lay ahead. In addition to his military education, de Gaulle's early life was marked by a strong sense of nationalism and a commitment to France's greatness. He was deeply affected by the memory of the Franco-Prussian War of 1870–71, which resulted in France's humiliating defeat and the loss of Alsace-Lorraine. This historical trauma instilled in him a resolve to restore France's honor and power, a mission that would define his military and political career. De Gaulle's upbringing was also shaped by the social and political environment of the French Third Republic, characterized by Republican ideals, but also political instability and social tensions. The era's debates about patriotism, national identity, and France's role in the world resonated with the young de Gaulle, influencing his worldview. His education and early experiences thus laid the foundation for his later vision of a strong, independent France. Upon graduating from the prestigious Saint Cyr Military Academy in 1912, Charles de Gaulle embarked on his military career as a young officer in the French army. His initial postings introduced him to the realities of military life during a period of relative peace in Europe, but rising tensions between great powers. De Gaulle was assigned to an infantry regiment where he began to refine his leadership skills and develop a deeper understanding of the practical demands of soldiering. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 transformed de Gaulle's military path dramatically. As a lieutenant, he was rapidly thrust into the brutal and chaotic conditions of trench warfare that came to define the Western Front. The conflict presented unprecedented challenges, testing both his physical endurance and his capacity for tactical innovation. De Gaulle's early combat experience was marked by a series of intense engagements where he witnessed firsthand the devastation and human cost of modern industrialized warfare. During the initial months of the war, de Gaulle's regiment fought in northern France, enduring harsh conditions, heavy artillery bombardments, and frequent counterattacks. Despite the difficult circumstances, de Gaulle's leadership qualities became increasingly evident. He was known for his calm demeanor under fire and his ability to inspire confidence among his men. His courage in battle earned him recognition, and he quickly gained a reputation as a capable and determined officer. In 1916, de Gaulle was seriously wounded during the Battle of Verdun, one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the war. A bullet struck him in the throat, and he was captured by German forces. This injury was nearly fatal, and his capture subjected him to months of imprisonment in a prisoner of war camp. This period of captivity was a formative experience for de Gaulle, allowing him time for reflection and study, during which he deepened his understanding of military strategy and the political implications of war. While imprisoned, de Gaulle engaged in intellectual pursuits, reading extensively and writing about military theory. He also maintained communication with the French resistance through covert means, demonstrating early signs of his commitment to French sovereignty and resistance to occupation. His time as a prisoner reinforced his belief in the importance of leadership, resilience, and strategic vision in times of crisis. Upon his release and return to France near the end of the war, de Gaulle resumed active duty with renewed determination. He was promoted to captain and assigned various staff roles that broadened his exposure to operational planning and command responsibilities. This post-injury phase of his career was crucial in developing his strategic mindset and deepening his appreciation of the evolving nature of warfare. De Gaulle's wartime experience also shaped his critical views on the French military establishment and its preparedness. He observed deficiencies in command structures and a reluctance to adapt to technological advancements, such as tanks and aircraft. These observations fueled his later advocacy for modernization and mechanization within the French armed forces. Throughout World War I, de Gaulle remained deeply committed to the ideals of patriotism and national unity. The horrors of the trenches and the immense sacrifices made by French soldiers solidified his resolve to serve his country not only as a soldier, but also as a future leader. His first-hand exposure to the limitations and strengths of the French military system during the war laid the groundwork for his subsequent efforts to reform France's defense policies. By the war's end in 1918, Charles de Gaulle had emerged as a battle-hardened officer with a profound understanding of both the tactical and strategic dimensions of modern warfare. His experiences in combat, captivity, and staff roles shaped his military philosophy, which emphasized flexibility, innovation, and the integration of new technologies. These lessons would prove instrumental in his later military and political career. The conclusion of World War I brought a complex period for Charles de Gaulle, marked by both reflection and professional development. The interwar years, (1919 to 1939), offered him the opportunity to move beyond battlefield command and focus more intensely on the intellectual dimensions of military strategy and the evolving nature of warfare. This phase was crucial in shaping de Gaulle's vision of modern conflict and his future role as a reformer. In the years following the Great War, de Gaulle served in various staff and instructional positions within the French army. His assignments included teaching at military academies, where he could impart his experiences and ideas to a new generation of officers. His time as an instructor was characterized by a rigorous analysis of the lessons learned during the war, particularly the limitations of static trench warfare and the need for greater mobility. During this period, de Gaulle was deeply influenced by the rapid technological advancements occurring in military hardware and doctrine. He closely studied the development of tanks, mechanized infantry, and air power, which he believed had the potential to revolutionize the battlefield. His writings began to advocate for a shift away from the defensive mindset that dominated French military thinking toward a more offensive, mobile strategy. In 1924, de Gaulle published his first major work, The Army of the Future, L'Armée de l'Avenir, which outlined his ideas on mechanized warfare. In this book, he argued that the tank would become the decisive weapon of modern battles, capable of breaking through enemy lines and reshaping combat operations. Although the book was met with skepticism and resistance from many traditional military leaders, it established de Gaulle as a forward-thinking strategist. The interwar period was also a time when de Gaulle was exposed to political and diplomatic currents that influenced his views on France's security. He was wary of the Treaty of Versailles, punitive measures against Germany, and the fragile peace that followed. He foresaw that Germany might seek to regain its lost territories and military strength, making France's strategic preparedness all the more urgent. De Gaulle's experiences and observations during this time led him to advocate for greater French military independence and self-reliance. He was critical of overdependence on alliances and international agreements, emphasizing instead the importance of a strong, modernized national army. This stance would later inform his leadership style and policies during World War II and his presidency. Despite his intellectual contributions, de Gaulle's career progression during the interwar years was slow. His unconventional ideas and outspoken criticisms of the military establishment alienated some senior officers, limiting his promotion opportunities. Nevertheless, he continued to build a reputation as a thoughtful and innovative officer, respected by younger colleagues and some political figures. In 1937, de Gaulle was appointed director of the French Army's tank development program. This position allowed him to influence the design and deployment of armored vehicles directly. Under his guidance, the French Army invested in new tank models and mechanized units, though these efforts were often hampered by budget constraints and institutional resistance. Throughout the 1930s, de Gaulle also paid close attention to international military developments, particularly the rise of Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler. He warned of the growing threat posed by Germany's rearmament and expansionist ambitions, urging French authorities to prepare accordingly. His calls for modernization and strategic innovation became more urgent as the continent edged closer to another major conflict. The dawn of World War II in September 1939 marked a critical juncture in Charles de Gaulle's military and political career. As Europe plunged once again into conflict, France found itself confronting the specter of a powerful and aggressive Nazi Germany. De Gaulle, now a seasoned officer with strong views on mechanized warfare, was called to serve in increasingly important roles, though his influence remained constrained by the prevailing military hierarchy. Initially, de Gaulle was appointed to a relatively modest position as a staff officer responsible for armored forces. However, His insights into the potential of tanks and mobile warfare quickly earned him attention among certain circles within the French military command. Despite this, many of his proposals were sidelined in favor of the dominant defensive strategy epitomized by the Maginot Line, a vast fortification system along France's eastern border. When Germany launched its Blitzkrieg, lightning war, against Poland in 1939, France and Britain declared war, but took limited immediate action, a period often referred to as the Phony War. During this time, de Gaulle continued to advocate for a more aggressive use of armored units, urging the French army to adopt tactics that could counter Germany's rapid advances. Unfortunately, his advice was largely ignored by senior commanders who remained committed to outdated doctrines. The German invasion of France in May 1940 shattered French defenses and exposed the weaknesses of the French military strategy. German forces bypassed the Maginot Line by advancing through the Ardennes forest, an area considered impassable by large mechanized units. This maneuver caught the French army off guard and led to a swift and devastating encirclement of Allied forces. Amid the chaos, Charles de Gaulle was given command of the 4th Armored Division, a newly formed unit intended to counter the German armored thrust. De Gaulle's leadership in several engagements demonstrated the effectiveness of mobile warfare when properly executed. His division achieved some tactical successes, including the notable counterattack at Montcornet, where his forces temporarily stalled the German advance. Despite these efforts, the overall situation in France deteriorated rapidly. The French government, overwhelmed by military defeats and internal political crises, sought an armistice with Germany. De Gaulle, however, refused to accept defeat. He saw the collapse of France not as an endpoint, but as a call to resistance. His stance was shaped by a profound conviction that France's honor and independence must be preserved, even in exile. On June 17, 1940, the French government, led by Marshal Philippe Pétain, announced its intention to seek an armistice. De Gaulle, then a relatively junior general, made a bold decision to reject the government's capitulation. With the assistance of the British government, he fled to London, where he prepared to continue the fight against Nazi Germany from abroad. This period marked the beginning of de Gaulle's transformation from a French army officer into the symbolic leader of Free France. His appeal was not simply military, but deeply political and moral. In a now famous speech broadcast by the BBC on June 18, 1940, he called on French soldiers, civil servants, and citizens to resist occupation and refuse collaboration, igniting the spirit of the French resistance. De Gaulle's message faced significant challenges. The Vichy regime, collaborating with the Nazis, controlled much of France and sought to discredit him. Moreover, his leadership of Free France was initially uncertain, with limited resources and recognition. Nevertheless, his unwavering commitment and charismatic appeal gradually attracted supporters both within France and internationally. After fleeing to London in June 1940, Charles de Gaulle faced the daunting task of rallying a nation that had largely accepted defeat and occupation. At that moment, he was little more than a determined officer in exile. Yet he possessed a vision of a free France that refused to submit to Nazi Germany. This vision was the foundation upon which he began to build the Free French Forces, a government in exile committed to continuing the struggle for liberation. The formation of the Free French Forces was marked by immediate obstacles. De Gaulle had limited military resources and no official recognition from the French government, which had largely aligned itself with the Vichy regime under Marshal Pétain. Internationally, Britain was initially cautious in its support, balancing diplomatic considerations with the reality of French divisions. Despite this, de Gaulle's resolve and eloquence won him the trust of key British leaders, including Prime Minister Winston Churchill. De Gaulle's leadership style during this period combined charisma, determination, and a strategic mind. He utilized radio broadcasts, most famously through the BBC, to communicate directly with the French people and soldiers, urging them to resist occupation and join the Free French cause. His message emphasized national unity, patriotism, and the illegitimacy of the Vichy government, which he labeled as collaborators rather than true representatives of France. One of de Gaulle's primary challenges was to unify the disparate groups opposing Nazi occupation. The Free French forces were initially small and fragmented, composed of soldiers who had escaped from France, colonial troops for French territories, and various resistance factions. De Gaulle worked tirelessly to centralize command and foster cohesion among these diverse elements, insisting on discipline and loyalty to his leadership. De Gaulle's diplomatic efforts extended beyond Britain. He sought recognition from the Allied powers, particularly the United States and the Soviet Union, to legitimize the Free French government. This pursuit was often fraught with difficulty, as some Allied leaders preferred to deal with the official Vichy regime or were skeptical of de Gaulle's ambitions. Nevertheless, his persistence eventually earned Free France a seat among the Allies, enabling greater coordination in the fight against Axis powers. During these years, de Gaulle also navigated complex relations with French colonial territories. Many of these territories, including parts of Africa and the Pacific, became battlegrounds of allegiance between Vichy and Free French forces. De Gaulle prioritized securing the loyalty of these colonies, which provided vital manpower, resources, and strategic bases for operations against Axis forces. De Gaulle's leadership was not without controversy. His insistence on centralized authority sometimes caused friction with other resistance leaders and political factions within Free France. Additionally, his rigid stance against negotiation with Vichy elements and uncompromising vision for a future France led to tensions with some Allied officials who favored more pragmatic approaches. Despite these challenges, the Free French forces gradually grew in strength and influence. De Gaulle oversaw the organization of military units that participated in campaigns across Africa, the Middle East, and later in the liberation of occupied Europe. His efforts helped transform Free France from a symbolic movement into a credible military and political actor on the global stage. By the time of the Allied invasion of Normandy in 1944, de Gaulle had firmly established himself as the legitimate leader of the French resistance abroad. His vision of a sovereign France, free from occupation and collaboration, resonated deeply with a population eager for liberation. De Gaulle's leadership during this period laid the groundwork for France's restoration as an independent and influential nation after the war. By 1944, Charles de Gaulle had become the recognized leader of Free France and an indispensable figure in the Allied efforts to liberate Western Europe from Nazi occupation. His role during the liberation of France was both military and political, encompassing the coordination of resistance forces, collaboration with Allied commanders, and the re-establishment of French sovereignty on French soil. This chapter explores how de Gaulle transitioned from exile to the forefront of France's liberation. The successful Allied landings in Normandy on June 6, 1944, marked a turning point in the war and heralded the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe. De Gaulle's Free French forces were integrated into the larger Allied military framework, contributing troops and intelligence. However, his involvement was not limited to military matters. He was adamant about ensuring that France was liberated by French hands, thereby restoring national dignity and preventing an Allied occupation. To achieve this, de Gaulle mobilized and united various French resistance groups operating within occupied France. These groups had been conducting sabotage, intelligence gathering, and guerrilla warfare against German forces. Under de Gaulle's direction, they were organized into the Forces Françaises de Hohenlohe FFI, which coordinated with the advancing Allied armies. This consolidation was vital in increasing the effectiveness of resistance efforts during the critical months of liberation. De Gaulle was also vigilant about the political future of France during this period. He understood that military victory alone would not secure France's independence or its place in post-war Europe. To this end, he worked to dismantle the Vichy regime's influence and to establish the Provisional Government of the French Republic, GPRF, as the legitimate authority. This government, headquartered in Algiers before moving back to Paris, symbolized the restoration of the Republic. The liberation of Paris in August 1944 was a defining moment for de Gaulle's leadership. As Allied forces approached the French capital, a popular uprising led by the resistance erupted, signaling the end of German control. De Gaulle entered Paris on August 25, 1944, in a dramatic and symbolic gesture that underscored France's return to sovereignty. His triumphant march down the Champs-Élysées was broadcast worldwide, marking France's rebirth as a free nation. De Gaulle's role extended beyond ceremonial acts. He swiftly moved to re-establish French civil administration, law enforcement, and public services, ensuring continuity and stability after years of occupation. He prioritized purging collaborators and restoring Republican institutions, though these efforts were not without controversy and political tension. His firm hand in these affairs demonstrated his commitment to a strong, centralized state. Internationally, de Gaulle worked to assert France's status as a victorious Allied power. He negotiated with Allied leaders to secure France's position in the post-war order, emphasizing French participation in the occupation of Germany and a role in shaping Europe's future. This diplomacy was crucial in restoring France's prestige and influence after the humiliation of 1940. The liberation period also saw de Gaulle dealing with political rivals and factions within France. Various groups, including communists and socialists, sought to shape the post-war government. De Gaulle's leadership was tested by these competing interests, but he remained focused on creating a unified and stable republic. His vision included a strong executive authority capable of guiding France through Reconstruction. The challenges of Reconstruction were immense. France faced widespread destruction, economic hardship, and social upheaval. De Gaulle's government launched initiatives aimed at rebuilding infrastructure, revitalizing industry, and addressing social inequalities. His leadership during this transitional period helped lay the foundation for modern France's recovery and growth. With the liberation of France secured, Charles de Gaulle faced the monumental task of guiding a war-ravaged nation through political and social reconstruction. The immediate post-war period was marked by deep uncertainty and fragile institutions, and de Gaulle's leadership during this time was crucial in shaping the future trajectory of the French Republic. In October 1944, de Gaulle assumed the presidency of the Provisional Government of the French Republic, GPRF, a transitional body tasked with restoring the Republic after years of occupation and collaboration. The government had to navigate the complex task of rebuilding political institutions, restoring public order, and addressing the demands of a population weary from war and deprivation. One of de Gaulle's early priorities was the purging of collaborators who had supported or cooperated with the Vichy regime and Nazi occupiers. The process, known as epuration, was controversial and fraught with challenges. While some collaborators faced legal prosecution and public retribution, de Gaulle also emphasized reconciliation and the restoration of national unity, wary of deepening divisions that could destabilize the fragile republic. Politically, de Gaulle was committed to reestablishing a strong executive authority to prevent the governmental paralysis that had plagued the Third Republic. He viewed the parliamentary system, with its frequent changes of government and factionalism, as inherently unstable. To this end, he promoted the drafting of a new constitution that would empower the presidency and streamline governance. Economically, France was in a dire situation. The war had devastated industrial infrastructure, agriculture, and transportation networks. De Gaulle's government worked closely with the newly created Commissariat General du Plan to develop strategies for national economic recovery and modernization. The planning process aimed at revitalizing production, improving living standards, and reducing France's dependence on foreign aid. Internationally, de Gaulle sought to reassert France's position on the global stage. He insisted on French participation in the emerging post-war order, including membership in the United Nations and a voice in the occupation and administration of defeated Germany. His vision was of a France that would regain its stature as a great power, independent in its foreign policy and respected among the Allied nations. De Gaulle's insistence on national sovereignty sometimes caused friction with the Allied powers, particularly the United States and Britain, who favored multinational cooperation and were wary of de Gaulle's assertive diplomacy. Nevertheless, he managed to secure key concessions that preserved France's dignity and influence during the complex negotiations of the immediate post-war period. Despite these achievements, de Gaulle's leadership style and political views generated tensions within the provisional government and among emerging political parties. His vision of a centralized executive authority clashed with leftist parties, especially the French Communist Party, which enjoyed significant popular support for its role in the resistance. These tensions foreshadowed the political struggles that would define the Fourth Republic. De Gaulle's tenure as head of the provisional government was marked by his refusal to become embroiled in partisan politics. He sought to transcend party divisions by appealing directly to the French people, emphasizing national unity and the need for strong leadership. However, his reluctance to compromise and his critique of party politics isolated him from many political leaders. In January 1946, amid growing political instability and disputes over the constitutional framework, de Gaulle resigned from the provisional government. He cited the fragmented nature of French politics and the failure to establish a government with adequate executive power as reasons for his departure. His resignation signaled a temporary retreat from frontline politics, but did not diminish his influence. Following Charles de Gaulle's resignation from the provisional government in early 1946, France entered a new phase of political experimentation with the establishment of the Fourth Republic. This period was characterized by a parliamentary system that aimed to restore democratic governance, but soon revealed deep structural weaknesses. De Gaulle's critiques of this political model and his role during these years would significantly influence his later return to power. The Fourth Republic was formally established in October 1946 with the adoption of a new constitution. Unlike de Gaulle's vision of a strong executive presidency, the system created a weak presidency and a powerful National Assembly, making the government highly dependent on fragile coalition majorities. This structure was intended to prevent authoritarianism, but often led to governmental instability and frequent changes in leadership. Throughout the late 1940s and early 1950s, France experienced political fragmentation. Governments were short-lived, and policymaking was often hindered by partisan disagreements. The major political parties, including the Christian Democrats, Socialists, and Communists, struggled to find consensus on key issues such as economic reconstruction, social reforms, and foreign policy. This instability frustrated many citizens and political observers alike. De Gaulle, meanwhile, remained a vocal critic of the Fourth Republic's parliamentary system. Though largely absent from frontline politics, he published his thoughts in speeches and writings, warning that the weakness of the executive branch undermined national unity and decision-making. He argued that the government's inefficiency threatened France's ability to address critical challenges, particularly in defense and colonial affairs. One of the most pressing crises during the Fourth Republic was the escalating conflict in French Indochina. The colonial war against the Viet Minh insurgency placed enormous strain on France's military and political institutions. The government's inability to resolve the conflict decisively fueled public discontent and highlighted the limitations of the parliamentary system to provide coherent leadership. Simultaneously, the Algerian crisis began to emerge as a central issue. Algeria was considered not a colony, but an integral part of France, and the growing demands for independence by Algerian nationalists created a deeply divisive and violent conflict. The Fourth Republic's governments found themselves increasingly unable to manage the crisis effectively, leading to political paralysis and social unrest. De Gaulle's views on the colonial question were complex and evolved during this period. Though initially committed to maintaining French sovereignty over its overseas territories, he also recognized the necessity of reform and gradual decolonization to preserve France's global stature. His later policies would reflect this pragmatic approach, but during the Fourth Republic, his influence was limited. Domestically, France also faced the challenges of post-war economic recovery and social modernization. The government pursued reconstruction plans and welfare policies, often with mixed success due to political instability. Industrial modernization and infrastructure development progressed, but were frequently hampered by short-term political considerations and competing party agendas. De Gaulle's absence from government did not equate to political silence. His 1954 publication, The New Republic, articulated his continued dissatisfaction with the political system and outlined principles for a stronger presidential role. These ideas gained traction among many who were frustrated with the Fourth Republic's frequent crises and lack of decisive governance. As political turmoil intensified, particularly with the outbreak of the Algerian War in 1954, call for de Gaulle's return grew louder. Many saw him as the leader capable of restoring stability, authority, and national unity. His eventual comeback in 1958 would be precipitated by the crisis of the Fourth Republic and his long-standing critique of its weaknesses. The late 1950s were a period of deep political crisis and social upheaval in France, which set the stage for Charles de Gaulle's dramatic return to power. The Fourth Republic was paralyzed by the Algerian War, frequent government collapses, and a loss of public confidence. De Gaulle, long a critic of the parliamentary system, was called upon as the last hope to restore stability and redefine French governance. The immediate catalyst for de Gaulle's comeback was the May 1958 crisis, triggered by a military coup in Algiers. French settlers and army officers in Algeria, fearing imminent independence negotiations, rebelled and demanded the return of de Gaulle to power. This revolt threatened to spill over onto the mainland, raising fears of civil war and prompting political leaders to seek a strong hand to resolve the crisis. Faced with mounting pressure, the French National Assembly and government invited de Gaulle to form a new government in June 1958. De Gaulle accepted but imposed conditions that reflected his long-held beliefs. He demanded extraordinary powers to draft a new constitution and reshape the political system. The political establishment, desperate for stability, acquiesced, setting in motion the end of the Fourth Republic. Once in office, de Gaulle moved swiftly to stabilize the nation. He declared that he would not be a mere caretaker, but would lead a fundamental transformation of French political life. The new constitution he envisioned would strengthen the executive branch, particularly the presidency, to avoid the instability that had plagued previous regimes. A national referendum was held in September 1958 to approve the new constitution, which created the framework for the Fifth Republic. The Constitution significantly increased the powers of the president, allowing for direct election by universal suffrage, the authority to dissolve parliament, and emergency powers during crises. The system was designed to ensure strong and decisive leadership, balancing parliamentary democracy with executive authority. De Gaulle was elected the first president of the Fifth Republic in December 1958, winning broad support from the French electorate. His presidency marked a decisive shift away from the fragmented politics of the past, emphasizing national unity, stability, and a clear vision for France's future. His leadership style combined authority with a deep commitment to French sovereignty. One of the first and most pressing challenges for de Gaulle was the Algerian conflict. He initially faced skepticism and hostility from both settlers in Algeria and hardline military factions who opposed any move toward independence. Nevertheless, de Gaulle gradually steered France toward a policy of self-determination for Algeria, a stance that shocked many but was grounded in his pragmatic assessment of the situation. De Gaulle's approach to Algeria culminated in negotiations with the National Liberation Front, FLN, leading to the Evian Accords of 1962, which granted Algeria independence. This achievement ended one of the most divisive and violent chapters in French history, although it left scars that would influence French society and politics for decades. De Gaulle's willingness to confront entrenched interests demonstrated his determination to place national interest above factional pressures. Beyond Algeria, de Gaulle pursued an independent foreign policy aimed at restoring France's stature as a global power. He championed the development of an independent nuclear deterrent, withdrew France from NATO's integrated military command, and sought to assert French interests distinct from both American and Soviet spheres. His vision was for France to be a sovereign actor on the international stage. Domestically, de Gaulle's presidency was marked by economic modernization and social reforms. His government encouraged industrial growth, infrastructure development, and the expansion of social welfare programs. The period saw rising living standards and the emergence of France as a dynamic post-war economy, although tensions remained beneath the surface. Charles de Gaulle's final years in public life and his enduring legacy are a testament to his profound impact on modern France. After more than a decade as president of the Fifth Republic, his leadership style, vision for France, and political decisions continued to resonate, shaping the nation's identity and governance well beyond his time in office. De Gaulle's presidency faced its greatest challenge in May 1968, when a wave of student protests, labor strikes, and social unrest swept across France. The upheaval was rooted in demands for educational reform, workers' rights, and broader cultural change. Though initially caught off guard, de Gaulle responded decisively, invoking the authority of his office to restore order. In response to the crisis, de Gaulle dissolved the National Assembly and called for new elections, confident in the support of the French people. His gamble paid off. The elections brought a resounding victory for his supporters, reaffirming his political legitimacy. Nevertheless, the 1968 crisis exposed the limits of his authority and highlighted growing generational divides within French society. Amid these tensions, de Gaulle sought to modernize the French economy and society. His administration promoted technological innovation, expanded educational opportunities, and invested in infrastructure projects such as high-speed rail. These initiatives aimed to prepare France for the challenges of a rapidly changing world while maintaining social cohesion. De Gaulle's foreign policy during his later years remained marked by independence and assertiveness. He continued to advocate for a Europe of sovereign nations cooperating as equals, famously vetoing the United Kingdom's entry into the European Economic Community twice. His vision emphasized a Europe that was neither dominated by the United States nor the Soviet Union, but acted autonomously. Despite his accomplishments, de Gaulle's presidency was not without controversy. His centralized decision-making style and occasional disregard for parliamentary opinion alienated some political allies and critics alike. His vision of a strong executive sometimes clashed with emerging democratic pluralism, reflecting tensions inherent in his political philosophy. In 1969, after a referendum proposing reforms to the Senate and regional governments was narrowly rejected by voters, de Gaulle took responsibility for the defeat and resigned from the presidency. This marked the end of his direct political leadership, but not of his influence. His departure ushered in a new era in French politics under his successors who operated within the institutions he had created. Retiring to his estate in Colombo-les-Églises, de Gaulle lived a quieter life, but remained a symbolic figure in French public life. He occasionally issued statements on national matters, maintaining a voice of moral authority and national pride. His writings and speeches continued to be studied by politicians, historians, and citizens seeking to understand France's modern evolution. De Gaulle passed away on November 9, 1970, but his legacy was already firmly cemented. He was widely regarded as the architect of modern France, a leader who navigated the nation through war, occupation, political turmoil, and rebirth. His contributions to French sovereignty, republican governance, and national identity remain central to how France sees itself. Beyond France, de Gaulle's legacy extended internationally. His insistence on national independence and a multipolar world influenced leaders and movements around the globe. His model of leadership combined pragmatism with idealism, emphasizing national dignity while confronting the realities of power politics. In retrospect, Charles de Gaulle's life is a study in resilience, vision, and leadership. His ability to adapt to changing circumstances without compromising core principles set him apart. He transformed France's political landscape, leaving a Fifth Republic that endures and a spirit of French grandeur that continues to inspire.